For coming. We are so glad to have you here in Stewart 6 on October 9th, 2025 at Princeton Theological Seminary, which is one of a great many stops in this very exciting book tour of our Palestinian guests and theologians who we're going to give the floor over to. We know some of you are just now coming in and finding your seat. You're so welcome, and we're so grateful to all of you who are joining us online from places near and far. You are all very, very welcome. I'm going to invite up one of our FOSNA staff members, the Reverend Addie Domsky, who has some announcements about books.
And I'm taking a look at, are we doing okay with interpretation? Is that working? I'm looking at the Zoom screen for an okay. Okay. So I see people are in the waiting room. Jesse. Someone else is facilitating this online. Thanks for seeing the people. And we're also interpreting this event in Spanish for folks on Zoom. So we are going to pause to make sure that folks are receiving that as an access to the speaker. So can you see if Jesse texts me right here? So I have one announcement for you, which is that this is a part of a larger speaking tour. We are doing 17 events in 6 cities. FOSNA is sponsoring this tour. I'll tell you more about them later, but the important thing for you is that the books didn't make it here to Princeton. And so Shannon works here and has volunteered to receive the books later, and you can pick them up in her office. I think this invitation is limited to folks who are within the Princeton network, so students, staff, faculty.
Anybody with a @ptsem.edu email address.
So we don't have books for you. I'm sure they'll sign a piece of paper if you want them to do that. But we are selling them 60% off the list price. I'm not sure if I'm doing the math correctly, but that's what I'm going to say. And so if you're interested in that, I'm going to pass around a form, which means you are filling this out, this QR code, you're buying the book here, and then Shannon has your book. So we apologize for that. We couldn't control the mail in this moment. Another thing I want to say is there are resources outside for you. Those range from a talk that Shannon is going to be at to resources for your communities, your churches, justice networks related to the PCUSA, clergy networks, info packets on what's happening to Christians in Palestine. So all of those resources are accessible for you outside. And now I think we'll get a welcome from Mark. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. And my name's Addie.
Greetings, colleagues and friends. My name is Mark Taylor. I'm in the Theology and Religion and Society departments here at Princeton Seminary. Both of those departments, Religion and Society and Theology, are proud to be sponsors of this event featuring John and Samuel Munayer. And I'm happy to introduce them and briefly so that we can get right to their presentations. I was on a phone call just this morning, a Zoom with theologians from across the world and many from the United States also. We were challenging each other with the kind of question we're getting from our youth. Where were you as theologians and religion scholars during the time of the US-backed genocide in Gaza? It's a question we all take very seriously to heart and are organizing as much as we can in relation to. Our speakers today, John Munayer and Samuel Munayer, are theologians from Palestine, younger generation of theologians exerting leadership that is a witness and is exemplary for the larger ecumenical church and for public witness and organizing and consciousness more generally. John Munayer is a Palestinian theologian from and based in Jerusalem, a PhD student at the University of Edinburgh. He has a number of organizations that he works with in Palestine on the ground, taking him into Palestinian communities of several different sorts. Sam Munayer is also a Palestinian theologian, also based in Jerusalem, with a BA in theology and philosophy from Durham University and an MA in Middle Eastern Studies, worked some with Ilan Pappé, theorist and historian of Palestine, about whom you may know. Both of these two authored together a work in 2022, which I used in a PhD seminar. The article was called Decolonizing Palestinian Liberation Theology, New Methods, Sources, and Voices. And many of the themes that you find in their book are broached in new ways in that article previously. I and our students learned much from their writing some years ago then, and I've just finished the new book, which I do recommend heartily, which is brimful of material. You are going to enjoy hearing from them, from a carefully prepared presentation by them, and there will be time for questions as well. So I'd like to turn things over now, I think, to John and Samuel. Welcome indeed. Or is it Addy Domsky from FOSNA? Yeah.
Best for last, which is the Munayers. So we do need to include folks who are getting this in interpretation. So I'm going to invite Jesse, my colleague at FOSNA, to just give some instructions in the Zoom meeting for folks who are using translation. Jesse, go for it.
Great. So I will give the English, and our interpreter should be able to do the Spanish. So to be able to listen to today's lecture in Spanish, please click on the interpretation icon. It's a world globe at the bottom of your screen. If a desktop, somewhere on your phone, if you're on your phone. If you don't see the world globe icon, just click on the 3 dots more and select interpretation and choose the language from your desired language, English or Spanish, from the list. Participants will then hear the translated audio, which does play at a bit of a lower volume. So, thank you. I think I'm also putting instructions in the chat in both languages too, if our translators are already busy working.
Okay, friends. I like to use a phrase from Marian Kaba that we're fumbling our way towards repair. So we're not doing this perfectly, but we are trying to do it. We want to make sure that the most people can hear the Munayers. So thank you, Jesse, for doing that. Thanks for the folks in the room. And now I want to invite my 2 friends, John and Sam, to speak to us.
Can you hear me? All clear? Yeah. First, a big thank you to Shannon and the rest of the Princeton crew that have been so hospitable to John and I. Thank you to FOSNA. Thank you to the translators and Hunter, and specifically who made sure that other people can hear us in different languages. And we are really thanking you for taking time to listen to John and I. We've prepared a presentation, and this is to facilitate a meaningful conversation between John and I and you guys, and also kind of situate the book that we've written. And the goal really today within this presentation is to have this kind of meaningful engagement, because we're here face to face and also online. And it's a real privilege that we are here in the US. So we will go through the presentation to situate the book and hopefully have really good time of conversation. So with that being said, yeah, I forgot about that. This book and our time here actually comes at a surprising moment, which there's been a ceasefire in Gaza. It is a mixture of emotions, emotions of sadness, emotions of relief, emotions of uncertainty. We're not sure what this ceasefire is going to entail. At the same time, we learned that one of the members of our communities has been arrested and administratively detained for 8 months, Layan Nasser. So I think the conversation today, within the specific moment of today, which is Thursday, is all the more important with conversations about Gaza and Palestinian theology.
So the second thing that happened yesterday, besides the ceasefire, was that it rained in Palestine. And this is the first rain for the months of October, November, and that signals to us that it's time to pick the olives from the olive trees. We always wait for the first rain. And as a family, every year we would go to different olive groves to pick the olives so we could make our yearly delicious olives. But I remember one time, probably when we were very young, I was probably 11 or 12 years old, we went to the fields that the Israeli army confiscated from our family. So we snuck in with our parents and our other two siblings, and we started to pick the olives. And our grandfather decided to come and join us. So our grandfather came and he started touching the olive trees. And then he started telling us a story about how the land was taken from him and how he was forced out of his home by a soldier. And he hid in the church in the city of Elid or Lydda. Some of you might know it from the book of Acts, chapter 9. So the church that was built there, that's where our family hid. So that moment of storytelling between our grandfather and ourselves connected us to the land, to our Christian heritage and ancestors, and to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And all of these three things were basically informing one another, our context and our theology. So this is what we're going to try and sort of introduce during today's lecture. We'll talk a bit about the context in which we're doing Palestinian theology, the theology itself, and then some of the new sort of voices and methods within the tradition. And that's where we'll speak a bit more about the book. But we really want you to kind of understand the context in which this book is operating in. So if we speak about the Christians in the Holy Land or in Israel and Palestine, all of the territory, we're talking about around 200,000. But out of them, around 80% would be identified as Palestinian Arabs. And most of them belong to the Eastern traditions. So for those who are slightly more familiar with the Greek Orthodox and Greek Catholic churches, there are some Roman Catholic and Protestant Christians who are Palestinians, but they're very much the minority. In Jerusalem, we're talking about around 10,000 Christians altogether. And you have to remember that in 1900, there was around 16% of the population in Jerusalem were Christian. Today, they're less than 2%. And the general population was around 20% Christian. And today, it's less than 2%. So we're talking about a population that has, in many ways, shrunk. And I'll speak about why that's the case. This is a picture of our family. So you can see here from the pictures, especially this one here with the Greek Orthodox priest. We come from a Greek Orthodox family in the city of Lydda. You can see the church over there in the picture. That's where our family hid during the Nakba. And you can see sort of the man right here is our grandfather. Just see it, Jacob. So this family experienced, as I mentioned, the Nakba, the catastrophe in Arabic, the expulsion from our lands and the confiscation of a lot of our fields. So around 750,000 Palestinians in general were kicked out of their homes during the 1948 war, the Nakba. And for the local Christian population, it was around 60,000 who were completely displaced. So it's almost 70% of what the Christian population was at the time. So you can imagine the trauma and the changes that this community faced. And suddenly they're living now, at least in our case, in a new state, the state of Israel. So where the city where our family come from is right next to the airport. In fact, the airport is built on some of the land that was confiscated from us. And a lot of the church properties and the churches themselves were damaged. So this is the context in which sort of the seeds of Palestinian theology, contextual theology, and liberation theology are emerging. For those who might know Naim Atik, he's sort of the father of Palestinian liberation theology. He says that during the Nakba, this is when the seeds of Palestinian liberation theology were sown. This is a picture of our grandmother. So the first wedding after the Nakba in 1948 in the city of Elid was between our grandparents. And this is sort of a picture of our grandmother, and it kind of symbolizes the perhaps state that they were in. It was a traumatic state. It's sort of the pictures is not fully there. And you can see also from the face of my grandma, I don't know if that's because it's her wedding day or because, you know, of the actual context, mixed feelings. In addition, after the 1967 war, or as we call it in Arabic, the Naksa, the setback, it was another turning point for Palestinian Christians and Palestinian theology. And that is because, as you know, Gaza and the West Bank were military occupied. And up until that point, all Palestinian villages and towns within Israel were also under military occupation. So now they occupied the West Bank and Gaza too. So there was sort of a new sense of how do we speak of the events in our context in theological language. Moreover, a lot of Christians all over the world, but specifically in the West, and also a lot of Jewish thinkers started to understand and interpret the 1967 war in theological and religious language, that this was a miracle from God. So a lot of Palestinian Christians had to wrestle with these questions. Was it indeed inspired by God? Are we an obstacle as Palestinians for this great sort of plan for the second coming of Jesus? And I'll pass it on to Sam.
So within this context of trauma and Nakba, for the Palestinian Christian community, there was a very unique sort of experience, which is that the Nakba was justified from our own faith. The Bible was used to ethnically cleanse our own community. And whilst the community was traumatized and gathering itself together, you know, our early pioneers of Palestinian theology were themselves refugees. Christian Palestinian theology emerged in the First Intifada in 1987. And as you can see, the First Intifada is a popular movement. It's women and Christian and Palestinians from all walks of life demonstrating against the Israeli occupation. Intifada means to shake off. And part of that shaking off of the occupation was also the colonial theology. Leading figures within our movements, our ancestors spiritually and also physically, are a number of different people that you might have read or know about. Julius Khoury, he's the founder of El-Liqa Center. El-Liqa Center is an encounter between Palestinian Christians and Muslims. Michel Sabah, the former Patriarch of Jerusalem, Catholic Patriarch of Jerusalem, we call him the Patriarch of the People, really led during that time. In 1988, he became the Patriarch. Naim Atik and Mitri were wrestling with certain questions during that time. Naim Atik first came out with a book called Justice and Only Justice, a Palestinian Theology of Liberation in 1989. Mitri just came back from Germany from his studies and started pastoring the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Bethlehem. And they were the leading figures that put Palestinian liberation theology on the map internationally, but also locally, they were involved with the community. As you can see, also we have Bishop Tallah Hanna from the Greek Orthodox Church. Munder Isaac is kind of in between those generations, currently now leading a lot of the advocacy for Palestinian Christians. Munib Yunan, the former bishop of the Lutheran Church. But also you had other actors from different voices, evangelical and not. You had Reverend Alex Awad, Noura Karmi, Jean Zaro. Jean Zaro led the Quaker community in Ramallah. Yohanna Catanascio and Salim Munayer, our dad, more connected to the evangelical spaces within Palestinian theology. And really Palestinian theology is asking the question that other liberation theologies are trying to address is, where are you, God? Not God, do you exist, but where are you, God? Wenak ya Allah? In addition to that, it's asking the questions of, can we understand the Bible and the Christian faith as a tool, as a source that actually is advocating for the liberations of Palestinians, not the oppression. So it's offering a hermeneutical challenge to Zionism, Jewish and Christian, but specifically Christian. And here the target is more to the West, because that's where a lot of evangelical Christian Zionism in the West is centered. To communicate and understand the New Testament and the life of Christ, it draws what it's called imperial theology, which is the logic in which the Roman Empire and Israel and the United States is operating in. So connecting that empire theology, faith under empire, is very, very important within Palestinian theology. And then to counter this kind of two covenant theology, end-time theology, obsessed with the rapture, dispensationalism, Palestinian theology wants to center its hermeneutic and theology in Christ. So here you have a quote from Naim Atik that says, Palestinian Christians, like any other Christians, need to have a Christ-centered hermeneutic in reading the Bible. So those are some really important political and theological positions of Palestinian theology. And also part of that Christ-centered theology, the activism that you see amongst Palestinian Christians and Palestinian organizations that you might be affiliated, it's taking Jesus as the blueprint for Palestinian resistance. So largely articulating a non-violent approach which seeks to reconcile with their enemy and also advocates for liberation for the oppressed. If you are aware of the Kairos document, which is kind of that ecumenical move by Palestinian theologians and activists getting inspiration from South Africa, I think it really summarizes Palestinian theology in that form very, very well. So if you read the Kairos document written in 2009, it's a very good, I think, summary of what Palestinian theology, liberation theology, is arguing for and what it seeks to address.
And there's a new one being written.
Yeah, and in November there will be a new Kairos document which is addressing the genocide in Gaza. And mostly it's the same authors, mostly. But what's unique about Palestinian theology, as I showed the figures, is that we're very ecumenical. This is where the events of Christ, the Holy Land, is where all denominations come. So it's a very ecumenical theology, and it's interreligious, because John mentioned the demographics. We're only 2% of the population currently in Palestine, and we're declining. So our contextual theology is by default one that is relating to our Muslim Jewish neighbors.
So I'll speak a bit more about some of the new voices. So now we're entering a phase of, as you could see, some of our theological elders as important and leading, and the sacrifice that they have taken. They're also just getting a bit older, and this is not sort of a dig at them, it's just life. And therefore there is a new emerging group of Palestinian theologians who are trying to wrestle, just as our elders had to wrestle with the Nakba, right? Our grandparents had to wrestle with, what does it mean now that our land has been taken from us, we've been expelled from our homes, our Christianity is now being used by all sorts of groups in the West to justify the oppression, right? So how do we deal with it? And actually one of our elders, Auntie Cedar Diabes, she speaks about the faith Nakba, right? It wasn't just a catastrophe of land, it was also one of faith, of deep understanding with God and relations with God. So these are some of the new faces of Palestinian theology, contextual. And what's interesting with some of the figures here is that they're trying to engage with different traditions who have also experienced either genocide or different forms of colonialism. And actually, you should be extremely proud that you have one of these theologians in your own institution, and that is Marah Sarji here at the bottom. And the unique work of Marah is, we'll speak a bit more about it, but she's looking into the genocide in Guatemala. and looking at how mothers and women there exercise different forms of care as a form of basically sort of the incarnation. But we'll speak a bit more about it. And this leads us to the book. Me and Sam had a project in mind, and we already contacted Orbis, the publishers, and we had already an idea of what we wanted to do. This was before October 7th and the genocide. But then those two things happened. And Sam and I said that we could not do the same project that we had planned, even though it was obviously related, but we needed to address theologically the genocide. It's not something you could just slip or not address. And not only did we want to do this, we said that we couldn't do it alone. Our original project, it was just going to be me and Sam, and we've decided consciously to do theology together as siblings. I don't know if that's something you can do with your own siblings. But we decided to open it up. And 6 other contributors joined us. And we're 4 men, 4 women, all part of sort of that new generation. And most of the people were in the pictures that we presented. So we came together, and as I mentioned, the olive tree for us is it's a spiritual being. It's not just a tree, and it relates to us and connects us to the land, to our Christianity, to our stories, to our ancestors, so on and so forth. So we thought it would be fitting sort of to engage with that. I'll just say quickly 3 main points that perhaps relate to most of the chapters of this book, and then Sam will continue. And that is that the book is unlike other Palestinian theology that is trying to convince Christian Zionists to stop being Christian Zionists, either if they're sort of fundamentalist evangelicals, right? Or even if you're sort of a Christian Zionist who's a Christian liberal and is operating within that sort of influenced post-Holocaust theology that has led you to certain Zionist theologies or ideologies. This book is not intended for that. This book is trying to address the solidarity movement for Palestine. And it might relate to other movements who are trying to seek liberation as well. So the audience is different, and that's what's unique about this book. The second thing is that it's trying to build those solidarity connections, transnational solidarity. So as I mentioned, Marah engages with Guatemala. We have a chapter that engages Black liberation theology and Palestinian liberation theology. We have another chapter that is engaging indigenous theology in Turtle Island, Canada, and Palestinian theology. So it's trying to make those moves of inspiration and how can we build broader coalitions? Because I think not only in Palestine, but in many other areas around the world, we're facing deep, deep crises. And the third and last point of this book is that it's not looking for theological sources only in academic books. It is inspired, for instance, we have a chapter by an author, Youssef Khouri, who is from Gaza, and his family at the moment are still in the church in Gaza. And he looks at his grandmothers as a source of theology, right? So we're trying to locate theology in places that perhaps we have overlooked.
The cross and the olive tree, why the name? So in an American context, you might already see parallels to James Cone, the cross and the lynching tree. So James Cone definitely was a huge influence on John and I, and it was a nice kind of nod to Cone to say the cross and the olive tree. But this similar to Cone, where Cone looks and argues that the cross in the 21st century must be understood through the lynching tree victim. Here we do something different with the cross and the olive tree. So the olive tree, as John mentioned, is the symbol of Palestine. It's the symbol of the resilience of our people. It is rooted in the land. We see olive trees as spiritual beings, that they teach us and inform us about the land and about ourselves. John mentioned first the story of our grandpa, who taught us about our history and theology when we were in the olive grove. So we wanted to really symbolize the olive tree as Palestine, our resilience, the people, the land of Palestine. The cross is where we are Palestinian Christians. This is our faith. This is our spirituality that we grew up with. But also the cross represents Gaza, the crucified people of today, and the West Bank, and all over Palestine. So that's why we wanted to bring it together, the cross and the olive tree, and really center it on land and of the people of the land. And in our introduction, we introduce Palestinian theology in a completely different way to perhaps how we introduce today Palestinian theology, which is through the metaphor of olive oil, the most important extract from the olive tree. So you have the olive oil of the church. This is the tomb of St. George, where John and I's ancestors helped rebuild the church. And as you can see, there is a bit of olive oil around the tomb that you take and you make the sign of the cross, or you anoint, or you use it for blessing. But also farmers bring their olive oil to the church to be blessed by the clergy. And this represents the Palestinian theology that is within our churches, that has been a very powerful tool, has been a very powerful way of communication to the Palestinian people and witness. But also at times that olive oil has been a bit diluted by our churches in order to preserve their own institutional life rather than being a witness to the oppressed. So that's the Palestinian theology in the church. Then we move to olive oil soap. This is one of the Palestinians, we all use olive oil soap to bathe ourselves. And this is to represent academic Palestinian theology, the Palestinian theology that is done with the pen. Probably here in Princeton, you're more familiar with that form of Palestinian theology. And that is to give a metaphor that Palestinian theology that is done by our pioneers and our elders were to cleanse yourself from colonial theologies, from those toxin theologies that are dehumanizing for us Palestinians, and to create a theology that not only gets rid of that dirt, but also nourishes your skin. So that is the olive oil olive oil soap that represents academic Palestinian theology. And to a certain extent, that is also the book. The book also is perhaps making new olive oil soap from old recipes. Then is the most important place that we wanted to highlight within Palestinian theology, that it often gets overlooked. And that is the olive oil of the lamp. So when in the olive harvest, you bring your olives to the press, and when the olive oil gets pressed, there's a type of olive oil that is not fit for consumption, but is actually given for lighting of homes, for the lamps. And that is not to say that olive oil is less valuable, but it's just accessible to all Palestinians. And that is lived Palestinian theology. That is where the grandmothers who feed, who sing songs, who teach you of your heritage. This is where the poetry, the veneration of saints, this is where we have agricultural practices. This is the lived Palestinian theology that is not necessarily articulated by the book in English and for advocacy purposes, but this is more for healing of the Palestinian home. This is more to light up the home in the midst of darkness, in the midst of oppression and genocide. And why we wanted to use this metaphor, and as John mentioned, there's themes in the book like grandmother theology, using the olive oil, martyrs, saints. It is to invite us to rethink how we understand Palestinian theology and theology in general. So the olive grove is the context in which we're doing theology. The farmer is the theologian, and the olive oil is the type of theology that we use. And we want to say that everybody in the Palestinian community is a theologian. You don't have to be trained in an academic setting and know how to rebuttal Christian Zionism, but you can draw on your own heritage, on your own experiences as a point of departure to do theology. So often when we sit around the table and we organize, we think about a conference, we select the speakers and the committees, we don't invite farmers, we don't invite poets, we don't invite grandmothers. So here we want to really push that kind of conversation within Palestinian theology, especially in a time of genocide, especially in a time when we are suffering and we need everybody on board in our movement. We want to open it up and not only focus on advocacy and critiquing Christian Zionism, but also looking to empower ourselves, to draw on healing. So much of our time we're focusing on critiquing empire, but we don't look at healing conversations. So that's why we wanted to introduce Palestinian theology in that manner. And in the book itself, you have different weaves of those kind of olive oil within the chapters. Part of doing also theology with your brother is that he kind of steals some of your time and some of your slides, but as John mentioned, the book engages with different audiences and different sources. We are not so interested on what the evangelical Christian Zionist might say or might think. We're not even speaking in their language. We're speaking the language of other liberation theologies. We're trying to push a different conversation within Palestinian theology that is lacking. And we use a lot of sources and methods, so we use a lot of oral traditions as well. Part of grandmother theology is an oral tradition that our contributor Yusuf is bringing from his grandmothers. We locate also where each contributor is coming from. So when you read each chapter, you see the city and where they're from. So demonstrating the locality of which this book is coming from. And there isn't one Palestinian theology, it's Palestinian theologies. We come from different experiences. We come from different places, but united from our connection to land. And then what's really lacking within our movement is that kind of intersectional approach. And that's why a lot of the book is focusing on womanist theology from Palestinian feminist perspectives. We're looking at different contexts in where theology and womanist theology is used to navigate suffering. So Dolores Williams, Hagar, Guatemala, and how the survivors of the genocide, the ones who are really the agents within their communities and the orators of the histories and healings. And we're doing this to be a witness to one another. We want to be like farmers. We do the olive picking together, not alone. And so much of our theology is focused on individuals and not as a collective. So we want to situate this book as a way of saying, we already have that theology when we pick olives. Let's name it and let's build from it a sort of articulation and vision of what we think is important for our solidarity, for our liberation, and for our own healing. So that is the cross and the olive tree. And John, you get the final word.
Yeah. So we don't have any books for you today, but obviously you can get some from the office afterwards. I think we'll open it up to Q&A. And yeah, it's just an invitation for you to walk with us in the Palestinian theology olive groves.
So we're taking questions online also. So I have those coming to me in my hand. We're going to allow time for interpretation, a sip of water. And the way we're going to do questions is take 3 of them at once, and then the brothers, as I refer to them, will answer them all together. So open for 2 questions, because I'm going to ask one. Oh! But raise your hand if you are interested in asking a question, and we'll take the questions all at once, and then they'll answer them. And I'm going to start with my friend Nusheen.
Hi, thank you for that. I'm wondering if you could speak to your experience, if you ever feel like because you are Christian, that you're a proxy of the West and empire. I ask you this because I'm West Asian Christian myself, and I'm wondering if you could speak to your experience on that.
Thank you. Take another question.
I'm curious in the process of reimagining the book after October 7th, if you had planned to include international examples of liberation theology, if so, why? And then if not, how that came about that you wanted to include that in this iteration of the book.
So we're gonna stop with this third one, which is if you're speaking to the olive oil soap, do you have any interest in them moving to the lamp? You get it?
No.
Is there
I get it.
is there a need to move between categories within our theologies? And then also just for the folks online, if you are interested in asking a question, please put it in the chat.
So to the first question about being a proxy because we're Christian, I think empires try to use anyone as proxy, regardless if they're Muslim or Christian or Jewish. There are sometimes attempts by specific Christians or churches to try and basically get Palestinian Christians to sort of be spokespeople for the empire or blame everything on Islam and Muslims. But overall, I don't think it's specifically because we're Palestinian Christian. It's just a general sort of empire thing. I'll let you answer this.
Yeah, about the usage of other liberation theologies. No, there was before October 7th. There was a whole movement, the younger generation, who felt that their questions were actually being addressed by other liberation theologies and not by Palestinian theology. I was not wrestling with certain questions about Christian Zionism. I was wrestling with other questions that Gutierrez, that Marcellus Reed, that Cohn was wrestling with. So that kind of move to other liberation theologies was way before the book. In fact, many of the new generation, we used to do reading groups and focus on different kind of theologies, liberation theologies, because we were feeling that there was something here that we could get inspired of in Palestine. More importantly, and what I really felt was important for the movement was actually the critics of James Cone. Not only James Cone himself, but the womanist critique of James Cone, the Cecil Cones, the Gaylord Wilmore, that kind of critique of Cone really sparked an imagination of what we need in our movement. And I think the book is pushing that forward. I would just say for the proxy, yes, there's empire proxy that want to use us. And of course, they target their own ways because we're Palestinian Christian and kind of creating this Western Christian civilization, and therefore they target us. I'd also say that in the Palestinian solidarity movement, Palestinian Christians can often be used as products for people to build their careers. So we need to also be careful, not only of those who are trying to advance their imperial theology through us, but we need to be careful as Palestinian Christians not to be products of the movement for Palestine, and therefore you become consumers. This book, John always says throughout the tours, we're not here asking help. We're asking you to come and walk with us in the olive groves, to be comrades. And I think that's a danger that might be more relevant to the people in this room.
Yeah. About your question, it's not that this is a binary, right? The clergy person in Palestine is influenced by the theology of the lamp in their tradition and through their grandmothers and grandfathers and so on and so forth, and maybe have read theology, and you could be connected to maybe two types of oils more than the other, right? But what we're trying to do is not to get necessarily the clergy and theologians to completely abandon what they're doing, but to value the olive oil for lamp more, because it's seen sometimes as superstitious, it's seen as not intellectual, and not as serious. But what we're trying to say is actually it's probably more powerful because it reaches more people.
We have 3 questions from online, so I'll do that, and then we'll take more. We have about 15 more minutes, so we've got time. Lots of gratitude from the chat. One question is, can you explain your option to focus on the internal rather than the external? This seems really important in a time of genocide. That's one question. More gratitude for you. Curious if you could say more about the cross as representing Gaza, especially in the context of your earlier comments about interreligious reality and a Muslim majority.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's a question that was given in Spanish. So the translation is a proposal from Mexico. Your Palestinian liberation theology is very valuable for other systemic victims, such as people in forced migration and the families of the disappeared. I propose we soon organize a conversation with these groups for mutual support. So an excellent invitation. Yes, and also, will the book be in Spanish?
So to answer the first question, we felt that within Palestinian theology, there's been a disproportionate focus on the West and on critiquing the West and engaging with the West. And we felt as a younger generation that there were some important conversations that we need to have with the global South and also the oppressed people in the global North and within ourselves. So when October 7th happened, yes, there were many statements for repentance to the West, and that is important. But what about statements and community engagement within our own that we felt lost and broken? We felt that there's been a prioritization of the West over Palestinians themselves. And this is part of the way we're trying to decolonize our theology, is to put Palestinians as and oppressed people as a priority and a target for our theology. So that's why we felt it is important to focus internally rather than externally.
And I didn't fully understand the second question, but we interpret Gaza as people being crucified today. And therefore, in order to understand the cross of 2,000 years ago, we need to understand the crosses of today. They interpret one another.
The cross as representing Gaza in the context of your earlier comments about not being in a Christian majority space.
Yes, there's some problems and there's some limitations in the Christian-centric of sometime liberation theology. However, many Palestinian Muslim famous poets, famous cartoon artists, Naji Ali, Mahmoud Darwish, they understand the Nakba, the suffering of the Palestinian people through the cross. So the cross is not necessarily seen by Palestinians as this very Christian salvation doctrine that they don't believe in, but they see it as a symbol of a Palestinian rebel that was once crucified by the empire. And I don't know if you know Naji Ali. You know Naji Ali? Do you know the boy that does this? So that's his cartoon. And it used to be the cross, his signature, not the cartoon. So it shows you that the power that the image of the cross has. Having said that, no doubt there needs to be ways of communication to our Muslim brothers and sisters in a way that we can relate to one another in a very good way, in a way that connects us to land, and that is best in the olive tree. The olive tree being uprooted is that symbol for us as the cross. So, yeah.
And we are working on trying to get it translated into Spanish, and we're in conversation already with some different indigenous communities from Latin America as well about these sort of topics.
So take 3 more from in the room. I'm going to start here. Can we start with you? Then we go Suyan. We'll make our way over here. We have some more online too.
Thank you for bringing your country to us. We are in solidarity with you. My question is, in this crusade that you are doing around the United States, what responses are you getting from Christians? Because we have seen what is happening in Gaza and with the occupation territories in the Palestine. And everyone, the whole world has seen that. and we have not been able to stop the genocide. And besides all the mobilizations that are taking place around the world. So we need a different structure for the world. So, because the one that are ruling this world is not working. So what are you getting from the Christian movement in concrete solidarity that will make a change besides doing reflection that will not get into the concrete of transforming the world?
Thank you for everything you shared today. So there's so many ways to pursue justice in the world, and my question is, why have you chosen theology? And why theology? What can theology do specifically in this moment that other things can't? And what can't it do? And I'm just curious for both of you, like especially I would say in the younger generation, there's sometimes less enthusiasm for religion or church, and there's growth of secularization. So yeah, so why theology particularly as a medium?
We're moving this way.
Thank you so much. This is great. I'm one of the lucky ones who has the book, and then so I'm really curious to know if you can tell us more about the book and especially the editorial process, right? How did you kind of choose the chapters, which would follow which, right? And just maybe tell us a little bit more about the contents of the book, right? I mean, such a great lineup, right? You have Lama Mansour, Shadia Qutbi, and so on. Just really great stuff. Thank you so much.
And for those of us who do not have a PTSM account, if you have a preferred way for us to order the book, please tell us that too.
We do. So we'll get you a QR code on your way out. If you want to do book logistics stuff, see me on your way out.
Okay, yeah. So about the first question, we're engaging with Christians who care about the lives of people in Palestine, right? So overall, the conversations have been fruitful. They've been kind. People have been generous. But what's most important is that we want to think together, not us coming to you asking for help, but think together how we can push back against some of the structures and systems and powers that not only are killing our children, but also arresting your children and also killing them too. So how can we together think about this? And it's what we want to do is move away from just the critique of empire, but how do we build the alternative? And I think all of us could benefit from thinking seriously and acting on building an alternative. About the process of the book, the minute we got the okay from the publishers, we reached out to all the sort of younger generations. We said, we have this project, do you want in? And then we also reached out to Naim Matik, the father of liberation theology, and Auntie Cedar, who's sort of also the mother of Palestinian liberation theology, but hates having her name on any publication because she's so humble. And we asked them to kind of bless the project. So we came together, all the authors. We sort of had conversations about the book and the project. They kind of gave us their blessings and advice, and then we started the writing process. And the way we structured the book is that we have the introduction, the whole olive oil thing. Then we have the chapter of Yusuf, his family are literally in Gaza, and we thought that we had to platform his voice first and his importance in relations to his grandmothers. Then after Yusuf, we have Marah. Marah is a chapter because her chapter is really, really heavy and powerful. And we thought that immediately centering it around sort of Gaza, and then it's really a rough chapter, a brilliant one, but it's a tough one to continue with that sort of rawness. And also it complements the grandmother theology that Yusuf speaks about, because she speaks about the theology of care amongst women. After that, we have Azmera, who brings into conversation Black liberation theology and Palestinian liberation theology, and specifically womanist theology. So we thought that's a good sort of flow. And again, it's Guatemala, Black liberation theology. After that, we have Lama, who speaks about divine imagination. How can we imagine as a decolonial act during this current time, right? And how can we try to live according to what we want to actually create? After that, we have Daniel Munayer, who's another sibling of ours, and he writes about the relationship between liberation and reconciliation. Can we talk about reconciliation? How do we engage with Israeli Jews? I think that's a very practical one. After that, we have Shadia, who speaks about the connection between indigenous theology in Turtle Island and Palestine and what can we learn from one another. Again, like thinking about new possibilities. So in the flow of Lama and Daniel. And then finally, our book is closing everything, saying our people are being killed and we have martyrs, so we need to think about a theology of martyrdom.
I'll just add on that we organized 2 meetings for all the contributors and Auntie Sider and Naim, Assis Naim, and we presented the chapters to Auntie Sider and Naim through the life of Christ. So Bethlehem, the authors that are coming from the Bethlehem region speak first, then Gaza to Egypt, Nazareth, Lama, Marah, Shadia, and then John and I and Daniel, Jerusalem. So kind of to really bring that kind of spirit into our collaboration. And we really try to be intentional with one another, that we're witnessing to one another. What do you think about that chapter? What do you think about that chapter? And in that meeting, one of the first meeting, Lama raised, and it's written in the book in the footnotes, about the about Abualita faith, the book of Abualita faith, and Yusuf took it and made Theta theology. So that was just a great way of how we are doing theology together that is so much lacking. We're not in the room together doing theology. Why theology is important? If you look at resistance movements around the world, spirituality is very central. The anti-apartheid movement, the civil rights movement here, I would say even Black Power to an extent. We were in Chicago and we saw the Nation of Islam, and we were blown away by some of the stories there. So spirituality also within secularism is really important, and theology doesn't have to be connected to a church or a mosque or a synagogue. It's simply a form of doing God talk. Even the negative is God talk. Not talking about God is God talk. So spirituality is something really important, and it's not taken serious in the left. And that's why there's a lot of reactionary action towards the systems that are now oppressing us, but not a place of actually healing. So spirituality is a place that we need healing for those who are in solidarity with Palestine. Moreover, the way I define spirituality, and we define spirituality, is the understanding of what's beyond oneself, rooted in community and land. So once you have that lens, a spiritual lens that is seeing what is beyond yourself, then you can really have imaginatory futurities that are decolonial. And I think that's what is really important. And that's also a problem the Palestinian left have, because the Palestinian left had a lot of influences from communism and Marxism, which kind of took away that important engagement of Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. So that's why I think theology is important for our movements for liberation. Also, John and I have to do theology because we love Jesus. So we go to church, we love Jesus. So I mean, someone asked me the other day, what do you like to read? I like to read theology. So that's why we choose to do theology. So.
And I'll just say that it might be the case in the US that most people are sort of the membership in churches is declining, but the majority of the world would identify as in one way or another as religious. And I think even the younger generation in the West, if I'm not mistaken, are finding different forms of spirituality, perhaps not in the same institutions that traditionally it's been found. So it's a tool that we need, and it helps us to build that alternative. The critique is easy. The building alternative is hard.
when I come over there, I'm going to read some from online. Anyone else, can you raise your hand for the final? Okay, so I got 2 more people in person. So just want to read an acknowledgement from folks that they have awe at the way that you're presenting with dignity and courage, and just wanted to recognize that. Someone asks online, one way to bring about hope to the land in times of crisis relates to a closer relationship with the olive tree or the natural world. Do you think that, for example, people in Gaza can't fish, the disconnection between the land is apparent? Would you say from your experience that a way toward justice and peace is living in closer relationship with creation?
Thanks so much for being here. I have a theological question that I'm hesitant to ask because I'm not sure if it's your question, but it's provoked in part by a question about the book and whether anyone in the book wrestles with Paul's imagery of the olive tree in Romans, because I feel like, at least in the West, contemporary theology, not so much post-Holocaust theology, but post-supersessionist theology has really turned to the olive tree election of Israel and the priority of Israel over the Gentile wild shoot olive that's grafted on in ways that I think there is differences among Palestinian theologians. Like Michael Sabat affirms the election of Israel and even a continuity between biblical Israel and the Jewish people today as the people of God. I don't think Munter Isaac and some of the others agree with that. So maybe it's a 2-part question. 1, does anyone talk about the olive tree in Paul? And 2, are you interested in this question, whether a doctrine of the election of Israel is possible from a Palestinian liberation theological perspective? And is the choice then just to deny a relationship between biblical Israel and the state of Israel and the people of the Jewish people, who are the people called by God as a people, according to post-supersessionist theology? So sorry if that's a academic question, too much of a theological question, because I really appreciate the spirit of what you're trying to do to move beyond that kind of older question. But I think that older question is at the center of a lot of Western Christian support and blindness maybe to the suffering of Gaza.
Yeah. I realize that we have more time, so I'm coming back to you.
I'll start with the first question. So important. The destruction of Gaza, the destruction of the West Bank, it's so much connected to nature, because creation is where we find our identity and where we find our humanity. So to give you an example, in my work, I'm a humanitarian worker. And in Gaza, families break bread together with their neighbors. It's eating together and sharing the harvest with one another. You press your olives together with your neighbor, so the olive oil fuses. That is the sort of life you have in Palestine. And when you're starved, that's the most evil thing you can do. To deny someone food and water strips down their humanity and kicks in the survival instinct. And part of that survival instinct is deforming Palestinians with their relationship with creation. So definitely that has been a real pain with the genocide. On the contrary, when we think of alternatives, of offering something, creation gives us a path, gives us an image for us to reimagine. So Koldovius and Leonardo Boff present liberation theology as a tree, the roots to the stalk and to the leaves. We're not doing the same imagery with the olive tree, but we're trying to say we need to be organic to the land. And naturally, checkpoints and settlements and how you treat neighbor will dissolve, and how you follow the land and follow the seasons. And part of the way we can envision a better future, a more liberative future, is how we eat our food, which is how we engage with creation. So definitely creation is something that is so important in modeling the justice and peace society that we want to be. And this is something that is important because it avoids this two-state solution paradigm that is just not organic to Palestine. And also the way states have been created in the Levant is not organic to the way people communicate and live their lives. So it's not only about Palestine, it's also about nation-state structures around the world, especially in places like West Asia, Middle East, Bilad al-Sham, the Levant, where it was carved by the French and the British in such a way that it's all dissolving. These nations say, we're seeing what's happening in Syria and Lebanon. These are failed governances because they are done artificially and not following land. So that's to answer the question online.
To your question, I personally don't think that the main reason why American Christians don't care about Palestinian lives is because they're wrestling with Romans 9-11 or the olive tree, right? I think the racism is much more deeper than that. I think that white supremacy is beyond just sort of wrestling with specifically the question of the olive tree. So that's sort of the first point that I'll say, that I don't really think that that's really the reason why people struggle to care about other human beings. The second one is, to a certain extent, this is a question that a lot of Western thinkers discuss amongst themselves. How do we treat the Jewish people in relations to the covenant? And I think both the anti-Semitic theology that exists in, for instance, the right, or even some of the post-Holocaust theology in the left, to both in some ways fetishize and kind of objectify Jews. And I think there's a very unhealthy relationship there that needs to be unpacked. And even this whole term of supersessionism, there was a brilliant article written by Michael Azar from Pennsylvania, who engages in this whole, he dives into where did supersessionism come as a term. And it goes back to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and around Zionist conversations there, trying to discredit other Christians who were saying, guys, what's happening in Palestine is wrong. So I can send you that article if you're interested. And the third and last point I will say about this is it's not a binary. It's not either the Jewish people have no connection at all to sort of biblical Israel, or that they're exactly the same. I think there's a nuanced approach that I think many of the authors in the book engage with, is we can recognize that Jewish people have a connection to the land. They might feel, consider it their homeland or home. In Judaism, the land is inseparable of their religion and practice. We just disagree with the way they want to exercise that connection to the land in Palestine. And we don't think that settler colonialism is the way forward. So I think there's ways that Palestinian Christians don't necessarily agree that this is, a fulfillment of prophecy and every single person is sort of a chosen person, and what does that even mean to be chosen and elect? But at the same time, not take it to a place of hatred of Jews. So I don't know if that completely answered your question, but it's sort of the important conversations around that.
So knowing that we have more time, oopsies, I invite you to ask questions, and I'm going to start with you. Is that okay?
Hi. This is our question about, do you think the clash of civilization narratives had really allowed this kind of like dichotomy of like Muslim voices from Palestine versus the West, and in this way, like drowning out voices like yours, Palestinian Christian voices in the the mainstream narratives?
Then we have two more questions from online. To what extent has Palestinian theology actually included and practiced feminist theology in its communities? And can you, I know you mentioned the ceasefire earlier, if you want to add more, well, will you expand on your sadness, joy, or expectations regarding the current peace plan?
Answer the. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Samuel Huntington and the Clash of Civilizations is something more of a symptom to 1492, which is the day, the mark of the Western Christian project of colonization of the world. So the Clash of Civilization and Christian Zionism should be understood as a symptom to a more profound form of racism and colonialism that emanated in that specific date, in my perspective. And I think in order to counter that, we shouldn't only focus on Samuel Huntington or Christian Zionism, but actually go to the roots of these theologies to uproot it. Definitely, though, that kind of narrative has really eliminated the idea of a Palestinian and a Christian. It seemed, or a Palestinian and a Jew, which is seen to many as an oxymoron. And that is to do with the racializations of Arabs and Muslims that, again, dates back to 1492 and definitely obscures our voices. And we constantly need to deal with, explain to people that you can be Palestinian, you can be Christian. There's a very funny story where I met with a Christian Zionist preacher in Jerusalem, and I was bored and I had time to wait, and we struck a conversation. I wanted to kind of pass the time and maybe get a bit of entertainment, such. And he asked me, "Are you Palestinian?" I said yes. He said, "Are you a Christian?" I said yes. He asked me, "When did you convert to Christianity?" So I said 2,000 years ago. And so there's always that back and forth that we Palestinian Christians are very much tired of. Mitri Rahib's first book is I Am a Palestinian Christian. So that's written in 1995, and that's already pushing against that narrative. And the early pioneers of Palestinian theology, I really put their stories and anecdotes to kind of bust that myth of Muslims and the Judeo-Christian tradition. But frankly, that's not something I'm interested in anymore. This is something that we've done well as a movement, improving, and I'm interested in other kind of conversations.
If I could just add that even the term Judeo-Christian, it's before the Shoah, the Holocaust, it was used as an anti-Semitic trope by Protestants to Catholics, saying you're so ritualistic and legalistic, you're like basically Jews, so you're a Judeo-Christian. But suddenly it flips after the Shoah. So it's like, how do these terms change very quickly, and why do they change? And how do we categorize people? About the feminism, in the different oils, you'll find Palestinian feminist theology. Clergy, we have one Palestinian woman who's a clergy. That's because most of our churches do not ordain women, and the Protestants are a small community. But Sali Azar, for those who might be familiar. In theology, you have the authors here who are speaking of sort of a Palestinian womanist theology. And finally, in the olive oil of the lamp, you'll find women using, for instance, female saints. This is the work of Mara. What she's doing is how she looks at the saint of Barbara, and how women use her story as a form of empowerment. And there's lots of other traditions that we can engage with, but definitely.
I'll add on, and I'm all the time confused because you're asking the question, but yeah. I know. Sorry. Also, you need to ask Palestinian women this question. John and I can give you our perspective, but this question, I think, is something that I'm again looking at you, Palestinian women should answer. But I think definitely the theology of the olive oil soap is something that I can say has been a very male practice, not so much a practice where Palestinian womanism or Palestinian feminism has been addressed. And there's also been, similar to what I said about using us as products, there's a lot of tokenism within our movement where, look, we're platforming a Palestinian woman and they speak, but are we actually addressing patriarchy? So there's a lot of those kind of frustrations the younger generation have, which is a lot of tokenism using, but not actually addressing the gender and sexuality dimensions within our movement, and also not only like focusing on women, but all the time when we speak about gender and sexuality, we think about women and LGBTQ. We should be just talking about sexuality, full stop. Heterosexuality, male, female, and that is something I think we need to address a bit better in Palestinian theology.
I see two people, and I have one from online. Can you mention some of the different Christian theologies within the Palestinian people and give a breakdown of who is Orthodox, Catholic, Protestants? What's the makeup of the community? Also, I have a comment from my mom that you're doing a good job.
My question was it might be a little more figurative, and I want to just hear a little bit more about the image of the olive tree. I want to ask about how the olives are harvested. The only method I've ever known is taking the big wooden, hitting the side of the tree, and then the resilience of the tree to do that, take that over and over again. But also just the reality that a lot of the terraces for terrace farming are being destructed, that the trees are getting uprooted, replaced with foreign trees from Eastern Europe. So I'm curious about if you could speak, this is where it's kind of figurative, to the perspective of the olive tree itself in this as a living creature, and an agent of God and an agent doing theology. That's it. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm hoping for. So thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for this. I'm curious, and I want to preface this by saying that this might be a naive kind of question, but I'm just curious about this idea or this concept of Palestinian people as indigenous. And what I mean by that is that, the word indigenous means different things in different contexts. If you use it in the US in a critical manner, it's a certain political status that was established in the 1820s and 1830s. And that gives people in the 21st century a certain class or a certain political classification that has like material implications. So I'm just curious, like when Palestinians refer to like self-identify as indigenous, does that give certain political leverage that offers some, something material? I know that's a hard way to ask that, but I'm just curious about what identifying as indigenous does outside of indigenous being this kind of abstract category of people related to a land, which has been kind of co-opted by liberal discourse.
With regards to the olive tree, the perspective of the olive tree, that's very interesting. The olive tree is the process of planting and growing an olive tree takes time. So the first 2 years of when you plant an olive tree, you have to water it. You have to take care of it. And then after 2 years, the roots are established and it can grow by itself, and there's no need to take care of it anymore. And then by year 7, 8, some say 13, the olive tree produces fruit. So from an olive tree perspective, things take time, there's patience, there's care. But once the roots are there, the olive tree will produce fruit no matter what the climate is. So every October, November, every first rain after the summer, the olive tree will produce fruit. Whether it's good, whether it's bad, that's one thing. But the olive tree will always be there. And the olive trees are so resilient that they have been in Palestine for thousands of years. So what can the olive tree teach us is that there's been empires that have come and gone, but the olive tree remains and the people remain. And I think that is something that the olive tree teaches you. It gives you shade in the summer. It gives you light in the darkness. It gives you food when you're hungry. It provides you cleansing when you're dirty. And I think the olive tree for me represents that sad beauty. It's so beautiful, the olive tree, but it's also so sad. So it really explains Palestine. So that's something that the olive tree can really teach us. And what's amazing that you can see the olive tree shoots sometimes, so it can explain the generations. And one of the oldest olive trees in the world is in Walajan, next to Jerusalem, and you can see the old kind of barks of the olive tree that have been there for generations. Then it grows and it grows, and it looks like it's a forest, but it's actually one tree. Yeah, I need to think more about that question, because I think there's more that the olive tree can teach. With regards to ceasefire and the mixture of emotions we felt, the reason is this ceasefire could have been established way long ago. And the leaders have shook their hands. The deals were done, but the people who paid the price are the Palestinian people. So the sense of sadness and sorrow that it needed that kind of agreement in order to bring a ceasefire and an ending to the bombings brings profound anger and sadness. Then there's also mistrust, because we have had ceasefire deals broken in the past, and I think already Israel have violated the ceasefire agreements to an extent, today, I think, or yesterday. And we don't know if this is going to hold and it will be repeated again. So there's a sense of anxiety that we have. And even if it holds, what are we going to do with Gaza right now? There's no clear established agreement about who's rebuilding what, how is it being rebuilt, and so on. And the colonization doesn't stop with the end of the bombings. So we're definitely in a mixture of emotions. At the same time, it's for the first time that the drone sounds have stopped and the bombings have stopped, and there's been quiet in Gaza. And that brings a bit of relief in an expectation to now really pump the humanitarian aid in and get it distributed where it needs to go. So that's kind of the feelings regarding ceasefire.
About the online question, and I will not look at Adi, the Christian breakup is that around 48% of the Christians are Greek Catholic, so they're under the Catholic Church, but they're Eastern Christians. The other around, again, 47% of the Christians are Greek Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, and then you have other churches such as the Syriac Church. We have also Armenian Palestinians, Coptic Palestinians. We have Lutherans and Anglicans, but all of these churches are much, much smaller in number. And about the question about indigeneity and indigenous, Palestinians, if they call themselves indigenous, it doesn't give them any sort of material advantage. I think from what I understand from the context here, I'm unfamiliar, but it doesn't give you any sort of status or anything like that. And in fact, in Arabic, the word that we use comes from sort of the word origin. We are the originals. Asliyin. Asliyin. So in that sense, it doesn't give you anything, but the way we understand it, it's sort of the second act. You only become an indigenous person when you meet a settler, right? When someone wants to take over your land and create something completely new and kick you out. So it's a political identity.
I would add that Palestinians, especially within Israel, so Palestinian citizens of Israel, like John and I and Marah and some of the other contributors, we are not taught our history and legacy. We are being also colonized through different ways. So saying you're indigenous is a decolonial process that we're reclaiming a connection and a land and a history. So in that way, it's political. And then it's also political because our experience of colonization is one of settler colonization, not just any form of colonization. So that links us to the Native Americans, to South Africans, to Algerians, to the Sami people, to other peoples who have been experiencing settler colonization, because it's the settler who is saying, this is my homeland. So when you say I'm indigenous, it's an embodiment claim of land that you're stating. So that's why it's important, indigeneity. And also within what we've been inspired within indigeneity in this context is indigenous sovereignty. The idea of having your own sovereignty, your dictation, and your centering of certain people is also centering it on indigenous people, and we've learned that from the Native Americans, who have said settler colonialism as a framework. Patrick Wolf, Lorenzo Viraceni, great. They've described the framework, a system, but the centering should not be on the settler; it should be on the indigenous. So that's why also indigeneity is very much connected to sovereignty.
I'm looking for any other questions. Okay, I see one. I'm going to make an announcement, and that'll be the end of our question time. How are we doing with the books? Is that paper being passed around, and have 25 people signed up? Is it full? Not yet. Okay, so if you want to get a book, we have them. They're just going to be delivered to you later. So if you got here late, fill out the info on that card, write your name down, and oopsies, we just didn't have the books get here in time. Also, just want to say before our last question, actually, Jeff, I'll have you ask the question, then I'll collect us.
My experience of working with people who are doing liberation theology is it's a critique of the church. And so I'm interested, I know Naim Matik, and I know he was critiquing what the Anglican Church was doing in Jerusalem and in the diocese, and that was part of the church's responsibility of addressing people's experience. So I really appreciate your identifying that experience precedes theology, not theology to experience. But I'm interested in knowing, has change started to happen to the church in Palestine in your experience? I know you're asking us to change, and that's totally appropriate because we've not experienced it, but is change going on in the Palestinian church, and how is that being seen?
So that's going to be your last question. I'm closing the space just to say that we're really grateful to have been here, and we want to be in relationship with you. So we are doing relationship work by having this tour, yes. And just want to say thanks to folks from Princeton who co-sponsored this, the Center for Contemplative Leadership and the Overseas Ministries Study Center. People who were super helpful to us are named Nathan and Shannon and Mark. Thank you so much for hosting us. FOSNA is the organization that is sponsoring this. This is Sagan, just in case you were interested in that name also. And we just want to be in relationship with you. If that's supporting you as a clergy person or a seminarian, if that's sending you on a delegation, if that's finally getting you the book that you wanted to buy today, we are interested in doing that. My name's Addie, and I work as the National Field Organizer. So I'm the person you can see afterwards if you have more questions. Now we'll end with Jeff's question, if you can remember it.
So our critique is also towards our own churches. And as you know, our churches, most of the heads of churches are themselves Greek Orthodox Greek, at the moment Catholic Italian, right? And even the Protestant churches that have a Palestinian leader, in terms of their funding, they're very much tied to their home or base church, and therefore don't, I think, have complete independence or autonomy. So our critique is towards our own church, and we write in the chapter of Palestinian Theology of Martyrdom where we're challenging this idea that churches in Palestine oftentimes will fundraise on this idea that the Christian population is going down and you as Christians abroad must save us, and to a certain extent what they're doing is they're not only trying to fundraise but also to protect the institution that is the church. And we think that sometimes that dilutes our ability to be real witnesses to the gospel of Jesus, especially during a time of genocide. So this book is critiquing, obviously, churches abroad, but specifically also our own. Sorry? Naim? Yep. Exactly. So we all have a lot to do better, and we're also critiquing ourselves, right? When there's a genocide, and we sometimes hear the bombs from our home, you ask yourself, are you doing enough?
And I think the battery ran out. So. And in the Theology of Martyrdom chapter, we target the Palestinian church and we say, how many statements have they done regarding the genocide in Gaza? And how many statements have they done in terms of freezing their bank accounts that Israel is doing, which is a real threat. But what are they prioritizing? And in the introduction of the book, the olive oil of the church, we say that the Palestinian church has been a place of blessing, an olive oil of blessing, but also at times have been the people who have offered vinegar to the crucified Christ, has been both the protector of the oppressed and the colonizer enabler. So we address that. And I would say that we're not asking you to change, we're asking you to join the olive picking and the olive grove. And we don't really address the churches, mostly we don't address the churches in the West. The main focus of the book, I would say, in many of the chapters, especially John and I's chapters, is the Palestinian church.
So thank you so much for joining us today.